Welcome back. This is our second video lecture on the product lifecycle. In the previous one, we looked at the developing of new products. In this one, we're going to look at the other stages of the product lifecycle, and particularly look at what changes about the marketing mix and what the marketing strategy should generally be at different stages in the product lifecycle. Now, from the outside view, it's easy to see different stages, particularly looking back. But I think that what is maybe difficult about the product life cycle is that you don't always know where you're in or what the next stage is when you're in it because it's kind of backward looking. The use of the product life cycle is just to understand that things will transition and allows you to kind of plan for what the next stage might be, even though you don't know when or exactly when you're going to be in particular stages. Now let's look at the roadmap before we get started. The first question we're going to look at is what are the four, or sometimes you might think five stages of the product life cycle. Traditionally, it's only four stages. You might think of it in terms of five. I'm mostly saying this because on the next graph, it really divides into five periods, but that's not really that important, but the point is, anyway. So we're going to go over what those stages are. Second thing is that how the product lifecycle differs for different types of products. So some of them have a much longer arc and some of them have a shorter arc. So for example, something that is a fashion versus a fad can have different, let's say, dynamics in terms of how they rise and then they fall. And so they're not going to always have the same regular pattern. And lastly, how do we manage manage the transitions in the product lifecycle as you go from introduction to growth to maturity to decline? And what is going to change about the marketing mix in each of those stages? So when people talk about the product lifecycle, they're mostly talking about this green curve here that goes from introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. So when you introduce a new product, relatively few people know about it. You're not going to have a lot of sales. It might not have wide distribution. Then you usually have a growth period where you see, let's say, the growth increases. This means it could be more distribution, it could be more familiarity, it could be more popularity among the consumers in the market. And then you reach some type of plateau at the top, which is basically that it's saturated. Everyone in the market who has a use for your product probably has purchased it. There might be more than one competitor in the market, and you have a kind of a stable market share at this time. And then finally, there's a decline phase, which means that it's going to drop off. This could happen because it becomes obsolete. It could happen because the competitor eats into your sales. It could happen because a change in fashion, or for example, some news come out, like for example, if it's that your product is hazardous or some type of regulation, that might lead to its decline. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to follow this. This is obviously a very normal, regular curve, but it's mostly for understanding conceptually what's going on. You might see a longer plateau. You might see, let's say, a slower rise or a slower decline, or greater decline and greater rise. But the point is that what's going to change is that you can measure the stage you're on by the sales. So it's going to, in a sense, be very low at first. You're going to see a growth period, the plateau, and then a decline. Now, we're not just interested in sales because what businesses ultimately are interested in is to what's their profit. So during product development, you're going to probably have negative profits because you're going to have a lot of costs in developing your product, testing your product, developing your marketing strategy, perhaps bringing to hire people. And therefore, you're going to have, let's say, negative profits because you're going to have no sales and some costs. In the introduction phase, what you're going to see is still you're going to see losses because you're still going to have a lot of costs when you ramp up, when you build the factories, when you hire your production force and things of that sort, and your sales are not going to be high enough to justify that. Now, if you just looked at the introduction period, you might figure this is a losing product because obviously you're losing money, you have negative profits. But what's going to happen is you should look at, instead of, let's say, what are the gains and losses of this period, you should look at the change in the profits over time. So you can see in the induction period by the change in the red line that's going to start to increase. And by the time, you could basically say to the break-even point, at the end, the one way to kind of post the end of the introduction period is when you reach your break-even point, when your revenues are matching your costs. So what you're going to see, though, is going to be a kind of a rise and plateau of the profits off the growth of maturity. And then as sales decline, even though your cost might stay constant, you're going to see a decline in profits, but you're not going to see a negative growth, negative profits, because at that stage you could just stop, let's say, stop your investment, stop production, stop your inputs, and therefore you're not going to run a loss. You might decide to cut it when sales no longer justify the cost that you're putting into production. So we're going to talk about each of these stages in more detail and what that means and what it means for marketing. So it's not, as I was saying before, it's not true that all products die or die quickly. So, for example, Coca-Cola has been around for 120 years. Tabasco sauce has been around for 130 years. And so some products are really have, strong staying power. Colgate toothpaste. And, part of this is a familiarity. Part of it is that this is kind of standard. Things that have become commodities, things like Morton salt, Diamond Crystal, um, basically they've been around for a very long time, and very likely they're going to be around for an extended period. Nabisco cookies would be another one that's been around for a very long time and still more or less has similar sales on most of its products. So, what are these different types of things that we could be putting out there, and what kind of is a typical product life cycle for each of them? So, the first one is that you have a product class, and this usually has the longest life cycle. Now, what needs to be explained here is what is a product class. So, a product class is basically something like gas-powered cars. It could be something like frozen foods. It's a large group. It's not a particular product, but it's kind of, let's say, something that's used. So you might think of something in terms of horse saddles or buggy whips or old horse-drawn plows. That's a product class. It can be very wide, and it's going to be around for a relatively long time, relative, let's say, more granular categories of the product. Now, within the product class, you have the product form, which means what is a standard product life cycle? It's going to have a standard product life cycle, which means the one you saw there, the green with the kind of parabola, rise and fall. But a product form is something like a four-wheel drive car, or, for example, a certain type of smartphone, or the old electric typewriter. It's one way to do it. It's not the only way to do it, but it's going to be around. It's kind of, let's say, a stable form because it's a common way for something to be presented. Now, within that, you can talk about different brands. So think about this. It could be something like Wrangler, Levi's jeans. That's a particular brand. It's not the only way that you have pants. It's not the only way that you have jeans, but it's a particular brand that's identifiable. It could be something like Oreo cookies from Nabisco. It's not the only one, but it's identifiable. These ones you're going to see change more because there's nothing essential about a particular brand to satisfy what a consumer's needs or wants. So, for example, if the brand's reputation changes, if there's other brands out there, if there's competitive attacks by other brands, you might see people provide the same product but change the packaging and the branding of it. Um, and then you can see things that are more ephemeral, such as style, which is a style can be. So let me start. So at the bottom with fads. Fads are something that you see like a very sharp rise, and then let's say a fall. A style is, let's say, a way that is commonly presented that can go rise and fall over time. So if you think in terms of clothing, you can talk about the women's necklines, or let's say the length of the skirts. Um, all these styles have existed before and during previous periods. Their popularity can go up and down over time, but they never fully disappear, and they never fully, let's say, dominate the market. So you can talk about different styles of apparel that rise and fall. That would be an example of a style. You might think in terms of um, I think that's expressed. A fashion is a popular style in a given field. So a fashion might be something like bell-bottoms jeans versus straight leg jeans and things of that sort. Something that is not as ephemeral, but something that is a clearly defined style in a field. So if you want to think of these in terms of visually, these are three different graphs here showing style, fashion, fad, and what the product's life cycle might look for each of them. So for a style, you're going to see an initial rise, and then you're going to see a plateau, and then you're going to kind of see the ripple on the plateau, which means it's not going to go to zero, it's going to rise and fall like that. And you could rise and fall, and it might not ever have like a decline to zero. If you look on the far right-hand side, you can see something that might be the product life cycle of a fad, and I think there's two things about here. One is kind of the shape of the curves, the convex versus concave nature of it. With the fan, you see kind of an exponential growth, i.e., it's not rounded. It goes up like a spike, but then its decline is equally harsh on the downscale. So the point is that a fad might never have a plateau, so it might only last for a few weeks, few months, even sometimes a few days. And when we think about things that, well, and to use a phrase that has a different meaning in this day and age, things go viral, that might be something you describe as a fad. And lastly, something out of fashion is going to have pretty much a normal curve. And the one we described before, you're going to have an introduction, a growth, a plateau, which is a maturity, and then a decline. It might not decline all the way to zero, but it's going to decline from its mature phase. So, as I was saying before, the product life cycle is basically a conceptual model, and it can be used to understand and develop marketing strategies. It is not necessarily a predictive tool that's going to tell you what's going to happen next, because you don't know that you're a style, fad, or fashion before it actually has. So by the time that it provides you some insight, the time for effective decision making might have passed. So the reason why it's difficult to use a product lifecycle is that you have to basically predict the future. You don't know what sales levels are going to be in the future. You don't know how long each stage is going to be. It could be different for different products. And lastly, you don't know, let's say, the function form of the curve. It could be like a cubic, it goes up and has kind of a ripple on a plateau. It could be a parabola, which a steady rise and decline, or it can be kind of a hyperbola and then going up and then a hyperbola going down. These are things that are unknowable. They might be helpful in the sense of studying past products and trying to draw analogies for that for things that you want to go forward with. But the point is that prediction is not a science. But as I said, it can be a conceptual tool, which means in trying to explain a particular marketing strategy, you can say, well, we think that this product is going to be enter a mature phase, and even though we don't know exactly when or how long, this would be an appropriate marketing strategy for this product in its mature phase and what we need to do, and therefore it can help planning in the sense of understanding what types of things you might want to do, and therefore to be ready to implement them when it becomes more obvious. Um, so what you shouldn't try to do is necessarily push it to the next stage. Like the introduction phase can last a long time, or it can be very short. The growth phase could be it could be vary in time. The length of I think there's kind of a pressure to push the mature phase because that's probably where you're going to get the most constant and secure and largest profits. But the point is, if you try to rush to get there, you might get something that's more of a fad with a quick rise and fall, and something that's going to be less robust over time. And so I think the point about it is that marketing should be adjusting to the consumer needs and wants instead of, in a sense, marketing trying to create what the consumer needs and wants. So let's talk about the first phase. The first phase of the product life cycle is the introduction phase. So if you remember the graph I showed you at the beginning of the video lecture, you can expect sales to be low. And it's going to be low for several different reasons. There's going to be low familiarity among consumers. There might be not universal distribution, which means even people who want it might not be able to obtain it. And you might not have ramped up your production that you can produce enough to even meet a demand for that it's higher. The costs are going to be high per customer because you have a lot of fixed and startup costs. You have the initial cost of setting up your production. You have your initial cost of hiring and training workforce. You have some upfront contracts, maybe about distribution, and those are going to be outsized relative to the number of sales you're making, and therefore it's going to seem to be a very high cost environment. The question is whether that's the long-term prospect for it or that's just a passing phase, because if you're confident that the introduction phase won't last forever, you might not want to look at the sales and costs at that particular time. So because costs are going to be high and sales are going to be low, not surprisingly, your profits are going to be negative or going to be limited. Most likely negative, at least at the beginning. So what, as I said before, what you want to look at is are profits, in a sense, decreasing over time? So the point is you might be negative, you might have negative profits, but are they as negative as they were in the previous period? Are they closing? Are you reaching, let's say, the break-even point? So who are your likely customers in this situation? They're going to be people who see themselves as innovators, the people who want the next new thing, the people who need the next great product. Generally, these are going to be wealthier, but these are also people who might have specialized knowledge about your field, who are always looking for improvement and can maybe aware of the quality differences of your new product that you're introducing. Um, However, one of the nice things about this is that you're also going to have fewer competitors. So if it's a truly new product, even though other people might be trying to develop it, someone is going to be first to market, and that person is going to have a clear field, at least for those new innovators who are hoping they will get it, will have own the item before, own the product before anyone else can get to it. So in this phase, your emphasis on marketing is going to be mostly about awareness. You want to get the word out there. You want to make the name of the product, even if people don't know what it is, people have heard of it. And you're going to try to get people to try your product, which means that they don't have any familiarity with it. They don't know whether to trust it. They don't have a reputation to build on. And so what you want the people is like, you might do a lot of particularly promotions that are like, if you're not happy, return it at no cost. You might have something where there's a free trial sample. And you want to do things that are going to create a buzz or create an awareness of your product. So you might look for more advertising that is going to basically just repeat and repeat the name of the product to kind of drill it into people's consciousness and memories. So something like you probably want to emphasize something that's going to be catchy about the name of the product that people are going to be, it's going to be easy for people to say, or if not easy to say, it's going to be easy for them to remember. You don't want to complicate it, so you're going to try to keep, brand consistency by offering a basic product. You're going to price it by a cost plus pricing model, and we haven't talked about pricing yet, but let me just explain it here. A cost plus is basically you're going to try to sell it at the cost of production plus a percentage of profit, which means that you're not going to try to, you don't know what demand is yet. What you're going to do is try to put the pricing a little bit above your cost so that the potential that if you're really, really popular, you are going to make a profit even at this early stage. Distribution is going to be limited, and because it's limited, you might not have enough product or inventory to sell. You probably want to make sure that your product is distributed in the places that are going to reach your targeted market segment. In this phase, for example, you want the early adopters are likely to be innovators and specialists, and so your advertising might be focused in, let's say, trade journals and people who have the means to buy something at a higher cost. And so you might, in a sense, rather than broadcasting to the general public, you might put it into a trade magazine or a technology magazine, or by trade magazine I mean something like that is related to the field, something that wholesalers and retailers might read, but is not necessarily read by the average consumer. And as I said before, you want people to try the product. So things that are, promise free returns if your people are unhappy, free trial samples. You might link it to another product. For example, if you buy another product, maybe if you're selling multiple products in your company, if they buy your more established product, they get a free sample of, let's say, your new product, as a way of just, in a sense, making them aware of it. During the growth stage, it's going to be a little bit different. What you're trying to do here is you're a new firm in the field. There's probably likely to be other firms in the field. What you want to do is try to be a first mover and maximize your market share, which means you want to establish what percentage of the entire customer that is going to be buying your product versus your competitors. You're probably going to see rapidly rising sales because people are going to become more aware, which means it's gone past, let's say, the early innovators. And it might be to people who kind of, let's say, one level down, who maybe don't absolutely need your product but are willing to try it out as an improvement. Your costs are going to go down, which means that you don't have as many fixed and upfront costs to deal with anymore, and so you're mostly dealing with the variable costs related to production, which means the costs are going to be the cost of the inputs into your product, as opposed to all the fixed costs such as the plant, administration, lawyers' fees to set up and things of that sort. And because your costs are going to be relatively controlled and your sales can be expected to rise, you're going to see rising profits during this period. So what you're going to see is people who are early adopters. So this is going to be people who are not specialists or not trying to do something new, but people who are willing to, willing to have the means to try something and who and what I mean by this is that think of in terms of flat screen TVs. You're going to have a situation where you're going to have a few people who are innovators because they have a particular reason or desire to have, a flat screen TV. Then you're going to get people who are going to basically, as they buy a new TV, they're going to buy a flat screen TV. Those are going to be kind of like your early adopters. But you're all, and what's going to happen in this period is that even though you might have been the first to market on it, you're going to see a growing number of competitors who are going to be presenting relatively similar products, and therefore you want to make sure that you kind of are in the top group and are not kind of like an also ran that is putting out an inferior product or developing a poor reputation. And this is where you want to, let's say, be a first. It's very important to be a first mover. So those strategies can work in the growth phase of the product life cycle. You want to offer while in the first stage you're offering the basic product. Here you might see product extensions, accessories, services, because what might be happening now is that enough people are using your product but enough people are using your product that your reputation for good service, your reputation of the warranty is going to matter more to, let's say, the general market. The innovators are maybe more tolerant of having a product that has bugs and is defective because they understand that they're, in a sense, dealing with the alpha phase of the product. You want to maybe lower your price to penetrate the market. And this is where you might see a market dumping strategy, which means that you might set the price below your cost. And you might set it below your cost because you're trying to get people to buy your product. And in a sense, if you have the ability to lose money to make it harder for your competitors to have the same cost, the same price and cost structure, you're going to lower that. And as it spreads to the market, that larger market share, and once you get that market share, you might raise your price again. So what you're going to go is from being selective distribution to intensive distribution, which means you're going to try to get your product in as many different distribution locations as possible. So you're going to try to push it into retail stores, you're going to try to push it into convenience stores, you're going to try to push it into to restaurants and things of that sort. And the advertising still is going to be building awareness because it's likely that not everyone is aware of your product's existence. But you want to make it seem like it's not something that is reserved for a particular segment of the market, that more people can benefit from it. And you might use your innovators as kind of examples or testimonials to say, like, we really like this product and you would like it too. You are not going to do as many promotions, but what you're going to do is you're going to hopefully that people are going to have a word of mouth, and the reputation you built with the innovators to continue buying your product. But you're not going to be able to you're not going to have to do the same type of like awareness advertising that you would have to do for a new product. The next phase is the maturity phase. And the maturity phase is basically saying, look, you're going to get to your natural level of demand for this product, which means that anyone that has a true need or want for your product is going to be able to purchase it. You're going to have established production behind it, and therefore, once again, your costs are becoming lower because in the first phase you have your fixed cost and your variable costs. In the second phase, you're not going to have so many fixed costs, but you're going to have the costs of the individual units, meaning whatever is the input to produce one unit of your product. What you're going to start to see at this is when you're having lower cost customer because you're going to start to experience a returns to scale, which means you're going to get better and more efficient at producing it, and which means your costs are going to go lower and lower. Your workers are going to have more experience about producing your product, and therefore they don't have to invest as much time in training. And so the point is, it's a lot easier to keep something going than it is to like start something up. As those costs decline, even at the same price, you're going to see higher profits. And so at this stage, you're going to start to see your highest level. You're going to start to reach a plateau of your profits at this time, and you're going to start to, let's say, target the entire market, which means the median. You're going to try to reach the kind of the middle consumer, the average consumer, and so. The other thing, so the point is that you might have a much more broadcast type of approach as opposed to targeting niche segments of the market. You're trying to, in a sense, reach the largest group of people who might be interested in your product and who have the need and want for it. Um, what's also going to start to happen is your competitors are going to decline because some people are going to realize that they're not profitable, that they didn't get market share that can sustain their continued production. And so what you're going to start to see is maybe from a competitive market, where there's a lot of different firms competing for the same customers, to a much more stable number, and probably on the margins declining. So at this, the marketing objective is to, you want to maximize profits because your costs are basically fixed, but your sales, if you can maximize your sales, you're going to have the largest profit. And what you want to do is probably more comparison, which means you want to defend your market share from new competitors, which means you can start to trade on your reputation. You might start to like push loyalty toward your product, and you might start more comparison advertisements saying this is why our product is better than our competitors. A good example of this would be established automobile companies, established soft drink companies like Pepsi and Coca-Cola, or GM and Ford, where people more or less have a reputation, have an idea in their head about what they associate with your product, and there's not going to be a lot of other people who are going to be able to eat into your market share, and you just want to move the product as much as you can. So during this maturity phase, some of the strategies that might work, you might want to diversify the product by having like different variations on it. You might start to show your product in different colors. You might, in a sense, tailor it to different niches, which means, you know, different colors, different shapes, for men, for women, for old, for young. And you might have different, think of this in terms of, let's say, once again, tablets. You might have a mini tablet for people who want a smaller one. You might have a larger one for people who use it as their primary device. You might have you might have one that is more protective because it's used by children. All those things could happen at this phase because you're trying to, let's say, get into every segment, and maybe you have your basic product, but you're going to, in a sense, add features to it that make it more appropriate for different market niches. Your price is probably going to be the same as your competitors. So early on, you might see your price jump around. It's going to be tied to your cost structure. Here, you have to be elite because it's a mature product and because people know about it. They're going to be more driven by price. So if you are selling at $99 and your competitor is selling at $89, your competitor is probably going to get all the sales, and the 99 is going to get ignored. And so more or less what you're going to see is standardized pricing emerge, where you're going to charge about the same as everyone else in the market. So because you're not going to be able to get this advantage on price because it's not a new product, because you're not trying to ration it, the key thing is the quantity that you're going to be able to sell, and so you want to have more intensive distribution. And kind of a continuation of the previous is that you're going to stress brand differences, like because there's not new competitors in the market, all the gains are going to be at the expense of other of your competitors. So you might want to say like why you want to choose us versus them, because it becomes more of an either-or decision. And as I said, the comparison ads that have started in the previous phase are going to continue into this phase. One way of thinking about this is like brand switching, which means why would you use like Bounty paper towels? Why would you use why would you use the competitors' towels? Because our towels are more absorbent and they pick up more water. Why would you? You can see Pepsi and Coca-Cola with this constant comparison kind of ads going on, encouraging that people might want to shift. You might want to portray the other one as being outdated. You might want to associate them with people who might have negative people or movements or ideas that have negative connotations in the general public. And connect things that have positive connotations with your product. So the point is that you're not going to change awareness. People are already aware of your product. The question is whether they're going to choose your product or your competitor's product, and that comparison is going to be the fulcrum for most of the way you're going to promote. Some other things you can do is you might try to modify things about your market, product, and marketing mix, because once you reach the maturity phase, there really isn't customers you haven't reached out yet. which means that everyone who has a need or want for your original product more or less has it. You don't need to. You maybe want to play around with the different elements of the marketing mix. Maybe let's see if we go for a low cost strategy. Maybe we're going to change our distribution model. So one example of this would be something like Starbucks, which originally was only sold in Starbucks stores. You might say, look, why don't we change the place of where we're providing this? Let's make this available in retail stores so that you're using the Starbucks brand, but not just selling exclusively, but making it available in other venues. You might try to reach modifying the market. You might try to reach some types of new market segments, things that you haven't reached before. Maybe a good example of this would be something like the NFL, where they have the Breast Awareness Week, and they kind of wear pink in their uniforms, and therefore you're trying to reach to a demographic that generally you felt that your product wasn't reaching in the past. Another thing you can do is by increasing consumption per person of your product, which means you might, I mentioned this before when talking about Coca-Cola and Pepsi, which is that Coca-Cola drinkers drink more Coca-Cola than Pepsi drinkers drink Pepsi. And so what you might want to do is people increasing their consumption of your product, which means you can use it in more situations. You can use it in conjunction with other products that are available, and you're just basically trying to suggest things, other ways that your product can be used beyond its original use. So you can do this by getting new users, although those are going to be relatively few, or new market segments. But once again, if your product is really genuinely mature, there shouldn't be that many new users or market segments out there that you haven't reached to yet, unless your product is pretty narrowly cast. You can kind of reinvent your brand. You can change your slogan. You might change your logo at something like this. You might try to make it more sleek, more avant-garde, more futuristic, so that doesn't seem like you're something that is outdated or obsolete. As I said, ways you can increase usage, suggesting different applications and different uses of your product, or in the sense suggesting that a higher intake of your product might be advantageous or having value for your customers. Modifying the product is more about adding features to it. So, for example, if it's something like if you have a light bulb, if your light bulb is something that doesn't last very long, you might, in a sense, make a light bulb that has more durability and less likely to break. Maybe something that's more reliable. You might, in a sense, create a light bulb for different lighting sets, different colors. You might give it a smart capability. You might reinvent it with an LED feature. If it's food, it could be something like different flavors or different tastes. So, like if you're like a frozen pizza, you might add cheese, then pepperoni, then you might add something with like I don't know, something that is maybe not as expected. I don't know, Chipotle or something like that, and give it more variety of taste. You can change the style. Usually this means changing the packaging or the attractiveness of it. And you can add more features, which means it's like kind of like an iPhone. The basic iPhone is a phone and a camera and an internet browsing device. If you can add more features to that with each version, each iteration of it, that might make it better. You can modify the marketing mix, which means you can do things like manipulate price. You can manipulate the promotions on that, and just kind of play around on the edges to see if one gets you a better return than, let's say, a different marketing mix. Cutting prices, different promotions, changing the places where your product is available. So, American Greetings. So American Greetings is, if you don't know what that is a one that makes most of the greeting cards that you find in stores. So like when you go to the birthday section or the holiday section, most of those are put out by American Greetings. A lot of them tend to be a lot more traditional. One thing to reach younger consumers is the idea of greater choice or personalizing their product. So that what they did is they created a website that allowed people to use social networking and logos and emojis and things of that sort to create more, more personalized, let's say, messages, and let's say kind of pick and choose the car that you're making rather than, in a sense, going with pre cards and messages. Now, the final one is the decline stage. When sales are declining, it's obviously when less people are buying your product than before. And this can happen for a variety of different reasons. It might happen that your product becomes so reliable that people don't need to buy it again. So if you're things like a shovel, if you have a good shovel, that shovel should last a long time. People are not going to rebuy a shovel every single year. Same thing with a lawnmower. You're seeing this a lot with computers, which is that computers have become so reliable that people don't buy a new computer every year, which was actually relatively common when I was in my 20s, because there was like every year the power of a computer is significantly increased, and if you didn't buy a new computer, you probably weren't able to run the new software and the new programs that you wanted to run on your computer. Um, that being said, you still have the cost structure that you had the mature phase, so you're going to see profits decline, but it's mostly going to decline because of sales. Um, and the only people who are going to buy your product are people who are kind of laggards, who don't like change, who are only getting it because everyone else has it. Um, a good example of this would be my father with smartphones. He had a flip phone until about 5, 6 months ago, and basically made fun of everyone who had a smartphone. And we tried to explain to him that this would make your life easier. This will allow you to see pictures of your grandchildren. Wouldn't this be a nice thing? And he says, no, no, I don't need that. I don't need my phone to do anything but make calls. And then he capitulated about 5 months ago, and then we all had to give him a training on how to how to use a smartphone. But the point is, those people are going to be relatively few. So the point is, you're picking off one or there, but if you already reached your market, most people have your product already. Um, what you're also going to see is you might only see one or two firms still in the market. So another good example of this is something like CD-ROMs. Now, people still make CD-ROMs because people still have CD-ROM drives, but there used to be about 7 or 8 different firms and companies that were putting them out. Now you really only see one, and it generally is something that's low cost. Even something that doesn't have any brand, differentiation about it. It's basically just a generic item. And sometimes you'll see this where things will be shifted having store brands or generic brands, and there won't be a major company brand associated with it. So what you're trying to do at this stage is you want to reduce your costs. You're not going to spend a lot on marketing. You're not going to spend a lot on production, because you're basically going to be throwing good money after bad, because you're not going to be able to justify it with increased sales. And you just want to promote loyalty and connection to your brand. So you might, in a sense, they're more reminders than they are awareness raising or compare and contrast type of advertisements. So what are some ways you can phase out your weak items? So if something is not selling, you're just going to cut it. You might cut the price, because by cutting price, you might increase sales, and you still might get more revenues. And you can kind of do that as long as you're able to stay above your cost structure. Um, you see this time and time with like chains expand. When they cut back, they're going to cut back their weakest stores or their weakest franchises. Um, what your advertising is going to be mostly targeting whoever your loyal customers are, whoever you know, to make sure that at least you keep them. And because if you start to lose those loyal customers, then you're going to diminish to zero. You can't keep everyone, but you want to make sure that you're making those loyal customers as happy as possible. And so you might see more targeting than you would have seen at the mature phase. So a few other things that you might want to consider about product decisions. Some things that can drive the product lifecycle beyond the natural, let's say, rise and fall of the market, are things that can come out of, things that are exogenous. So if there are regulations regarding your product, if there are, let's say, safety hazards related to your product, if your market is patented and your patent is expiring, if there are issues with warranties, all these things could impact, let's say, the course of the product life cycle, and they might not follow the natural flow. And so, but these are things that are easier to anticipate. So for example, if you have an exclusive patent over a product, but you know that patent is expiring in 2 years, you're going to try to make your sales up front, and you might plan your exit of the market as more generics come in to take that space for a patented product. And so these are other things you might take